Okay, good evening everyone, and thank you for coming this evening. And I would like on your behalf to say a special word of thanks to all the board of directors, past and present, for all the work they've done to keep the society going and being successful the way it has been, and long may it continue. And I hope tonight not to keep you too long and to sort of perhaps not entertain you but inform you about this remarkable man that we're going to talk about. There was something of Michael Collins about Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. He was charming and charismatic. He was both a listener and a doer. In the period when the German forces occupied Rome in the early 1940s, that is between 1943 and 1944, he hid in plain view, used a series of fake IDs, and was an expert in disguises. He had friends and confidants all over Rome who were prepared at great personal risk to themselves to help conceal at his request people wanted by the occupying forces. There was also a price on his head. Official Ireland has been slow to recognise the stature of Monsignor O'Flaherty. The memorial in the previous slide was unveiled in Killarney in 2013. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Rome, family and friends had arranged for a grove of trees to be planted in his honour in the National Park in Killarney. But it was only in 2016, as you can see from the slide, that the Irish ambassador to Rome, Her Excellency Miss Emma Madigan, unveiled a plaque in the German college where the Monsignor lived for most of his time in Rome, praising the moral courage of this priest who saved thousands of Allied prisoners of war, dissidents, anti-fascists and Jews when Rome was occupied by German forces. Perhaps it was because of involvement in setting up the British escape line that prevented the Irish government in the mid-1940s from officially recognising his very considerable achievements. When other countries like the US, Britain and Italy bestowed their highest honours on him. He is credited with arranging the refuge for around 6,500 people, concealing them in private houses and apartments, convents and monasteries, all across Rome and even in the Vatican itself. I became aware of the achievements of the Monsignor in 1983, when they were shooting on location in Rome the film about his life called The Scarlet and the Black. Some of my friends at the time were extras, but one in particular, who has now passed away, I'm afraid, played the part of the Italian priest whose pastoral work brought him into conflict with the Gestapo and the SS, who occupied Rome in the years 1943 and 44. There are scenes in the film where he's interrogated and tortured in the infamous detention centre on Rome's Via Tasso, located off the major artery which links the Basilica of St. Mary Major and the Basilica of John Lateran. It's called the Via Mediolanum, and visitors to Rome with their backs to St. Mary Major and looking down towards St. John Lateran, Via Tasso is about halfway down, parallel to the Via Mediolanum and on the left. Like most historical films, though, it revels in duality. Two carefully cultivated opponents, the Monsignor on the one hand and the Nazi commander, Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Kappler, on the other. In the film they're pitted against one another in seemingly mortal combat, which of course blurs the complexity of what actually happened. The strikingly handsome Gregory Peck plays the Monsignor, while a haughty and menacing Christopher Plummer plays Kappler. The Monsignor was actually born Hugh Flaherty, without the O, on the 28th of February 1898 in the townland of Lisrobin Registrar's District of Warboy, Superintendent Registrar's District of Canturk on the Cork and Kerry border. His father was James Flaherty, an RIC constable stationed in Tralee, and his mother was Margaret Murphy. The person who reported the birth to the authorities was James Murphy, most probably Margaret's father. His mother must have returned home to have her first child, rather than stay in a cold and impersonal institution like an RIC barracks in Tralee. Looking towards the bottom of the page, or the slide, there is a James Murphy in Lisrobin West in Griffith's valuation. He occupied lot 9 and had a substantial farm of about 69 acres, a dwelling house and a family and farm buildings. 2 other people called Murphy, probably relatives, also have houses on the farm, and he is the only James Murphy present in Lisrobin at that particular time. In 1909, James Flaherty, then an RIC sergeant in Killarney, retired from that organisation with a pension of just £1 a week, which was clearly not enough to maintain his growing family. He found employment in Killarney as a caretaker in the golf course and a caddy. Although he was born in Cork, the Monsignor always considered himself a proud Kerry man. He went to school at the Presentation Monastery close to St. Brendan's Cathedral in Killarney. He must have been a clever and diligent student because he was asked to stay on as an assistant teacher or monitor. While at Presentation, he applied for and won a King's Scholarship, a 2-year King's Scholarship to train as a national school teacher at the De La Salle Training College in Waterford. He did not attend secondary school. Just before his final teacher training exams, however, he had an attack of pleurisy and was unable to sit the examination, and so did not actually qualify as a national school teacher. It was perhaps during this period of illness that he came to realise his vocation to become a priest. In personal letters from that period, he was worried that his parents did not have the necessary funds, but his father assured him that he would happily sell everything so that his son could become a priest. In August 1918, he was admitted to the Apostolic School at Mungret College, Limerick, to begin training for the missionary priesthood. This picture here comes from 1919. While he was a seminarian at the Apostolic School in Limerick, he became an ardent nationalist, a teetotaler and a non-smoker. His brush with the Black and Tans in Limerick during their occupation of that city, where he and some friends were arrested and detained for a few hours, also made him anti-British. In 1922, he was sent to Rome to study theology at the Propaganda Fide College by his adopted diocese, the Vicariate of Cape Town in South Africa. He was ordained on the 20th of December 1925, but instead of being sent to Cape Town, he was appointed vice-rector of the college. He was just 28 years old, an unusually young age for a Vatican appointment of such importance. While he became part of the administration of the college, he continued his studies, and in 1928 he was awarded the so-called triple doctorate, that is, a doctorate in canon law, theology and philosophy. The Monsignor was obviously a high-profile young priest, and he was appointed to the Vatican diplomatic service in 1934, serving in Egypt, Haiti, as the picture shows, Santo Domingo and Czechoslovakia. He was recalled to Rome in 1938 and assigned to the Holy Office as a clerk. His job description in Italian is scrittore, which literally means writer. The Holy Office is now called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. From what we have seen of the Monsignor so far, there is very little to distinguish him from a successful career priest in the Vatican administration. Nevertheless, he stood out. In the first place, he was not Italian. In a Vatican administration dominated by clerics from that country. Secondly, his physical presence was imposing. He was over 6 feet tall, weighed about 14.5 stone, and he stood head and shoulders above most of his colleagues. They resented having to physically look up to him. In addition, his command of several languages, his outgoing and gregarious disposition, his mischievous and twinkling blue eyes, combined with his skill on the golf course, meant that he was a welcome guest at any gathering. He had a number of good friends among the Roman nobility, that is, those noble families in Rome who owe their titles to the papacy rather than to the monarchy. The German college, or the Collegium Teutonicum, is not inside the Vatican City, but is close to it. In fact, in the slide you can see at the very extreme left the cornice of the Bernini colonnade, which embraces the visitors to St. Peter's Square. It is one of several hundred extraterritorial properties which belong to the Vatican in Rome. They have the same rights as an embassy following the ratification of the Lateran Treaty in 1929 between the fascist state and the Vatican city-state. Residents at the German college are normally priests engaged in postgraduate studies, or those who work in the Vatican administration. This is the Holy Office, a stone's throw from where the Monsignor lived. For most of his time working there, his immediate superior was Monsignor, later Cardinal, Alfredo Ottaviani, well known for his role in the Second Vatican Council. Even though he was an austere and extremely conservative clergyman, Ottaviani was very supportive of this outgoing, gregarious and ebullient Irishman. He tacitly permitted him to play golf when the clergy of the Diocese of Rome were forbidden to do so, and he overlooked his unofficial activities in helping those whom the fascists, later the German authorities, considered as undesirable dissidents. Early on in the war, the Monsignor was just an observer. He listened to the broadcasts from both sides, but was unsure which one to believe. His road to Damascus moment came when he saw how the Roman Jews were treated under the racial laws introduced by Mussolini and his government in the late 1930s. This is how he describes his conversion. They treated them like beasts, making old men and respectable women get down on their knees and scrub the roads. You know the sort of thing that happened later and after that. It got worse and worse, and I knew then which side I had to believe. Italy entered the war on the side of Germany, of course, on Monday, the 10th of June, 1940. All Allied ambassadors moved into the Vatican. The British ambassador, Sir Darcy Osborne, was the most senior member of the diplomatic corps at the time. Ireland had 2 ambassadors, but these continued to live in Rome since the Irish Free State was neutral in World War II. The ambassadors were Dr. T.J. Kiernan, was Minister Plenipotentiary to the Holy See, and His Excellency Mr. Michael MacWhite was Minister at the Irish Embassy to the Italian government. The Vatican City-State, of course, was also neutral during the conflict. Around Easter 1941, the Monsignor was appointed secretary to the Papal Nuncio to Italy. The Nuncio had no English, and the visitation of prisons and hospitals where Allied prisoners of war were detained was part of his mission to Italy. His progress was, to put it diplomatically, measured. But the Monsignor made contact with the Allied detainees, gathered their names, and took the night train back to Rome so that their names could be broadcast on Vatican radio to reassure their families. He was back at work the next day. The Monsignor also made sure that they got the parcels and books which had come through the Red Cross. The Monsignor, as you can see from his activity, was proactive and had little time for the irritating rules and regulations imposed by the Italian authorities. Representations were made by the Italian authorities to the Vatican, and he was removed from any direct involvement in humanitarian aid to Allied prisoners at the end of 1942. The Irish authorities also contributed to his removal. Back in Rome, the Monsignor, almost by default, became the go-to person for anyone looking for help. Initially, he made suggestions and gave advice. He also drew on a wide circle of clerical and non-clerical friends who always seemed ready to help, with accommodation and with money. He placed people in convents and monasteries, as well as in private houses, and very often using his own money, rented apartments to give them shelter. He even hid people in his own residence, the German college. By November 1943, the Monsignor and his many friends were providing sanctuary for about 1,000 prisoners of war. Mussolini lost a vote of confidence at the Fascist Grand Council on the 25th of July 1943 and was replaced by Marshal Badoglio. From that moment, Italy quickly descended into chaos until the armistice was signed on the 11th of September 1943. Italy surrendered, and Italian troops abandoned their position as prison guards and as soldiers, since they considered that for them the war was over. This took the Germans by surprise, and the Gestapo and the SS moved to take over Rome. Without understanding the implications of the changed political situation, thousands of Allied prisoners turned up in Rome seeking help. The Monsignor was overwhelmed by the sheer numbers, and together with John May, butler to the British ambassador, and a friendly count in the Swiss embassy, they set up an organisation to cope with the large numbers. Luck was on their side, however, when a British officer called Major Sam Derry turned up in late November 1943 and took over the day-to-day running of what has become known as the British Escape Line. This is what Derry had to say about the Monsignor. Quotation: "Tramping around Rome with him, I marvelled at how his organisation had already concealed more than 1,000 prisoners of war in convents, crowded flats, and outlying farms." Commenting on the Monsignor's tendency to take everybody at face value, he said, "The Monsignor, needless to say, welcomes every new arrival with cheerful enthusiasm and paid no attention to my repeated requests that he was putting himself in danger." As Kappler and the Gestapo tightened their grip on Rome, things got worse for everybody, especially for Jews, deserters, and dissidents. Trainloads of these unfortunate people were sent from Italy to Auschwitz. In Rome, this led to increased resistance. Like résistance in French, the Italian word is quite different. It's partigiani or partisans. This activity, resistance activity, culminated in a bomb attack on troops marching back to barracks. This attack happened in the afternoon of the 23rd of March 1944, the 25th anniversary, as it happens, of the foundation of the fascist movement by Benito Mussolini, popularly known in Italy as Il Duce. 33 German soldiers were killed in a roadside explosion on Via Rasella, a narrow city street close to the rear of the Quirinal Palace in Rome. Retribution was both swift and savage. The police chief in Rome, Pietro Caruso, and the special anti-partisan unit set up by Pietro Koch were drafted in by Kappler to compile the list of Italians to be executed. 10 Italians for every German. This was carried out the next day, on March the 24th, 1944. But news only emerged the following day, on March the 25th, in a communique issued by the German High Command and published in Rome's newspaper, Il Messaggero. 5 of Monsignor O'Flaherty's helpers were among the executed. This slide shows where the executions took place, an abandoned stone quarry just beyond the catacombs. During this time, that is from January 1943 to the end of May 1944, the Monsignor's activities were well known to the German forces, and of course the official Vatican state became concerned. All religious, including the Monsignor, were confined to their convents and monasteries, and the Monsignor himself was carpeted by Monsignor Montini, later Pope Paul VI, possibly to be a saint in the future, and he was also carpeted by Pope Pius XII. He was forbidden to leave the Vatican or to have anything to do with providing money and shelter for escaped prisoners and dissidents. While the Monsignor obeyed the letter of the prohibition, he continued to walk every evening, as he had always done, across the top of the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, reading, or pretending to read, his breviary, and people still came to consult him. But by late 1944, the occupying forces, the German occupying forces, were preparing to leave as the Allies approached from the south. Rome was eventually liberated on the 5th of June 1944 by the American Fifth Army under the command of General Mark Clark. In the months after the liberation of Rome, there's little detail about the Monsignor's activities. He now helped Italian prisoners of war to be reunited with their families. He also worked with Jews who wished to reach Israel. He also helped Italian and Austrian men who had worn the German uniform and had fought under the German flag. When questioned about this activity, he simply replied, "God has no country." The Monsignor was recognized for his work in helping prisoners of war by heading the list of 40 people awarded a CBE on the 20th of April 1945. He was also honored by the US, being given a Medal of Freedom, the US Medal of Freedom with a silver palm. Italy awarded him a silver medal for military valor with a state pension, which he never collected. His career in the Vatican peaked in 1959 when he was appointed head notary at the Holy Office, the first Irishman to be appointed to such a delicate and important position. He retired the next year on health grounds. He'd had a stroke, and returned to Ireland to live with his sister, Mrs. Brian Sheehan, in Cahersiveen. One of his last public appearances was on the Eamon Andrews programme, This Is Your Life. The programme was originally meant to honour him, but his poor health meant that it was made to honour his friend from the British Escape Line, Major, now Colonel Sam Derry, the man in the middle. He died of a stroke on the 30th of October 1963, and is buried in the grounds of Daniel O'Connell Memorial Church in Cahersiveen. A large number of politicians were present or sent their representatives. A good friend of his from her days in Rome in the late 1940s, training to be an opera singer, Veronica Dunn, sent flowers. I would like to conclude by reading a tribute by one great Kerry man to another. The poem was written on the occasion of the planting of a grove of Italian trees in the National Park in Killarney in 1994 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Rome. And here it is. There's a tree called freedom, and it grows somewhere in the hearts of men. Rain falls, ice freezes, wind blows, the tree shivers, steadied itself again, steadies itself like Hugh O'Flaherty's hand, guiding trapped and hunted people day and night, to what all hearts love and understand, the tree of freedom upright in the light. Thank you for your attention. Questions and observations are welcome.